What did WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert say this week? Or was it more about what she didn't say? I have Maggie Hendricks here to discuss the answers to both of those questions. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, it starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. You are locked on to women's basketball. I'm Jackie Powell. I'm one of your hosts on the program, usually on Fridays. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball nationally at many other places. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by everyone at the Next, a place where we cover women's basketball all the time, and we tell the stories that need to be told every day. Subscribe now to support the staff at the Next that works oh so hard to bring you this coverage that matters oh so much. It is $9 a month or $72 per year. Find us at thenexthoops.com and subscribe. And please remember that Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. Our sponsor today is FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, last time we were together, dear listener, Chloe Peterson and I discussed the Rookie of the Year race and previewed the final regular season matchup between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Well, now we know that it will be the final matchup between those two of the 2024 calendar year because Angel Reese has since had a season-ending wrist injury, which we're all very sad about. But anyway, we're here 2 weeks later. And so in segment 1, we're going to get into these comments from Commissioner Cathy Engelbert and explain why this was a misstep on her end and what she could have done better. In segment 2, we're going to discuss what exactly should be expected of a commissioner and of the WNBA's commissioner, and why this might have been an opportunity for the league to break the status quo. And then finally, we're going to talk solutions, because I know both Maggie and I are very solution-based people. What can be done to address these issues? And so here we go. There is a lot to unpack. So Maggie, I think it might be a good idea, before I play for the listeners what Cathy Engelbert said, if you can just provide maybe a little bit context as to sort of where she was, how this came about, and then I will play the clip for everyone.
Yeah, well, she was doing an interview on CNBC, which is, of course, a very financial focused situation, and talking about investing in the league and health of the league, which in all honesty is a great thing. But then when asked a question about about cyberbullying, she completely missed the mark, as we're about to hear.
Yes. So let's take a listen to the clip.
Everybody who wants to invest in women's sports.
Let's go to that question, which raises some sensitivities of rivalries between players. In the case of Angel Reese, who's just had to shut it down because of a wrist injury, Caitlin Clark, who's continuing to play. Rivalry that goes back to their college days, presumably, where I guess some trash talking entered in. But now it seems on some social media channels to have taken a darker turn, a more menacing turn, where race has been introduced into the conversation, where sexuality is sometimes introduced into the conversation. How do you try and stay ahead of that? try and tamp it down or act as a league when two of your most visible players are involved, not personally, it would seem, but their fan bases are involved in saying some very uncharitable things about the other.
Well, the one thing that's great about the league right now, we do sit at this intersection of culture and sport and fashion and music. Like the WNBA players are really looked at now as kind of cultural icons.
True.
And when you have that, you have a lot of attention on you. There's no more apathy. Everybody cares. It is a little that Bird Magic moment, if you recall, from 1979 when those two rookies came in from a big college rivalry, one white, one black. And so we have that moment with these two. But the one thing I know about sports, you need rivalry. That's what makes people watch. They want to watch games of consequence between rivals. They don't want everybody being nice to one another. So the social media is different today than it was in 1979 when it didn't exist. But, I always tell the players, I was told a long time ago, if someone's typing something in and you wouldn't ask their advice, ignore it. So it's a balance, but certainly from a marketing dollars, but corporate partners are stepping up to endorse these players much, much more so than they were 5 years ago because they see the benefit of having women and diverse women representing their brand.
I agree. Rivalries are good. Manning and Brady.
Yeah.
So that was Cathy Engelbert's comment. And as you all can see, we're still a little bit shaken up from what happened in that around, I don't know, minute and a half of chat. So Maggie, what's your immediate reaction to this? What was very wrong with what she had to say?
Well, the thing that I find so frustrating about it is she was teed up a great question where she could have talked about things that the league was doing to help keep players safe. She could have talked about, our players are dealing with racism thrown at them, and it's not okay. It's not okay for people to say terrible things to these players. And trust me, you and I both know, and I think probably most of your listeners do too, there are terrible things being said to these players. And it was a moment where the players who are dealing with this could have felt support from the highest person in the WNBA. And she just completely, I don't even know what she was talking about, like rivalries and then immediately marketing dollars. And we've all been in press conferences with Cathy, and sometimes her answers have nothing to do with the question you've given her. And that is a very common corporate thing. I did media training eons ago. Let me tell you, that's what we told them to do. But in this case, she was given such a softball of a question, and she bunted and didn't make it to first base.
Yeah, it was very disappointing. And I think there were players who have reacted on social media and in press conferences about how this has made them feel. What reactions really stood out to you?
It's actually Breanna Stewart and what she had to say about how it was just a missed opportunity, and it was a missed opportunity to speak out against something terrible. And she was right. And Breanna Stewart is very active in the Players Association. And truly, it was the Players Association statement that I thought was the strongest to say, like, what are we doing here if we're not going to back up these players who are going through some awful cyberbullying, and beyond that, it's racism, it's homophobia, it's sexism, it's all kinds of just terrible, it's death threats. Though these aren't just like little things that you can say like, oh, just ignore it. I've been there. You can't just ignore it. And she completely missed out on a chance to support her players.
And Maggie, you said that you've been there. I guess if you could just take our listeners inside why it matters to have someone at the top of your organization supporting you.
Yeah. So well before I covered women's basketball, I covered the MMA and the UFC. And a former UFC commentator and very well-known, very well-paid podcaster called me a word that I would not ever say on this podcast, but it starts with a C. And I And he said it on like a very popular MMA forum. And I just had a deluge on Twitter, on Facebook, which was like my personal Facebook. It wasn't a work Facebook. On Instagram, my parents got messages, all kinds of awful, awful bullying for weeks from his fans. And the biggest thing that made a difference in that time was the people who stood with me, the people who stood by me. And that I was at Yahoo at the time, that included my editor, but I got messages from the very head of Yahoo Sports. I got messages from all of these different writers from around the country who I had looked up to, and I didn't even know they knew I existed. I heard from all these different people who made sure I knew that they had my back even through this tough time. And that is honestly the biggest thing that I remember, is knowing that people at the highest levels of my organization were supporting me. And that was the opportunity that Cathy Engelbert had. Like, I don't know what it's like to be the victim of racism, right? So I can't speak to that, but I can speak to what it's like when you're just getting this deluge of hateful comments at you. And that, like, Instagram, you usually open and like, let me scroll through and see some fun pictures. And should be something relaxing. And instead so many players were getting awful, hateful things. And it was an opportunity for Cathy to say, yes, you have my support, to those players. And she missed it.
Well, thank you for sharing. I know that's a very tough thing to go through, but I think it really illustrates why this misstep matters, because people's lives and mental health is really at stake here. So before we go to the break, I just wanted to say one thing about what she had to say, which was, she brings up the concept of rivalry. She talked about Bird and Magic. She talked about how great having rivalries are in this league. But that does not mean having rivalries is not mutually exclusive with hateful comments online.
Yeah.
And I think we just need to realize that they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. You can have one without the other. The example that I always think about is when Kelsey Plum said in the finals last year, she said that the Liberty didn't like each other as a team. And that still bothers them to this day. Trust me, I see them doing things on the ground that tell me that comment still bothers them. But Kelsey Plum wasn't using any hate speech here. She wasn't attacking the players based on their race or sexual orientation or any sort of ethnicity. She was just being competitive.
Yeah. Yeah, just like Sabrina hitting the night, or even like in the Olympic Games, Sabrina telling the Belgian crowd to shh. Like, all of these things, that's fun rivalries. That makes it so fun to follow the sports, to follow women's basketball. Those kinds of things are a blast. And whenever race or homophobia or racism or homophobia or any of these things get introduced to it, that sucks all the fun out of it immediately. So when you start talking about rivalries and think that like that's just racism and homophobia are just part of it, then you've completely missed the best parts of some of these rivalry games.
I couldn't have said it any better. Coming up, we're going to dive into what exactly is expected of a commissioner in general and what is expected of the commissioner of the WNBA. Those are two different things, at least it seems. But first, I do want to talk to y'all about our good friends at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if that's not enough, be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's Double Your Winnings for all of Sunday. September 15th, pregame moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be live streaming Thursday, September 12th. View your account page now to learn more about the boost yourself. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sports book. Thank you, FanDuel. Now, I do want to talk to you all a bit about imposter syndrome. And so the thing is, when you're not feeling confident, that stops you from doing and being your best. And, you know, one of the biggest things that can lead to lack of self-confidence is your skin. So that means acne breakouts, rosacea, wrinkles. These can all take a toll on your confidence level. And that's why we're really excited to partner with Apostrophe, one of the sponsors of this episode. And so Apostrophe's goal is to help you feel confident in your own skin. So Apostrophe is an online platform that connects you with an expert dermatology team to get customized acne treatment for your unique skin. Through Apostrophe, you can get access to oral and topical medications that use clinically proven ingredients to help clear acne. Simply fill out an online consultation about your skin goals and medical history. Then you snap a few selfies and a dermatology provider will create a customized treatment plan for you. So Apostrophe has been really helpful for me when it comes to helping me deal with my hormonal acne, which usually comes around once a month. It makes sure that the bumps and the blemishes that come up on my skin aren't as painful and that they don't make such an impression on my face. Apostrophe helps with pimple size and decreases redness. We have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lockedon when you use our code LOCKEDON. That's a savings of $15. This code is only available for our listeners. So to get started, go to apostrophe.com/lockedon and click Get Started. Then use our code LOCKEDON at sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Apostrophe, thank you. We appreciate you. And so now I am back here with the one and only Maggie Hendricks, and we are talking about WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert's comments from earlier this week. So, Maggie, I think where I want to continue is, so then Cathy Engelbert made a statement of herself, right? At almost midnight of that evening. So it was September 10th when this happened. So at around like 11:40 that evening, she tweeted this out. There was no formal press release. It was, quote, "During a recent media interview, I was asked about the dark side of social media online and online conversations about WNBA rivalries and race. To be clear, there is absolutely no place for hate or racism or any kind in the WNBA or anywhere else." So that was a short and to the point statement. What would you have liked to have seen her response look like? And what do you think should be expected of Commissioner Engelbert?
I think what I would have liked her to do is either do a video with a with like there are outstanding WNBA social media people. We know them. Do a video that's a conversation with one of them. Do a conversation with Ari Chambers or with about cyberbullying and about racism and about homophobia and how it has no place in the league. put her voice and her face behind it. You know, just say something more concrete, and especially more concrete. There are amazing Black reporters and Black social media content creators in the W that she could have said, like, okay, so I screwed up. How can I fix this? Let me make sure that I'm talking to somebody who sadly will probably know about what this is what the racism and the awful things that can happen to people who put themselves out there in this league. Let me have this conversation with them, and then kind of go from there. Making it a tweet, like, I don't know, what was it, like almost 12 hours later?
Yeah.
It kind of showed to me that she didn't get how upset her players are. I mean, really, like, if me and you are upset, bummer, but we can move along. But these are her players, and there's a CBA negotiation coming up. And if they start from a contentious spot, that's not great.
Oh, yeah. And we will get more into that, into solutions in segment 3. But I saw a really interesting tweet from Brendan Clean, and I'm going to read it, and I want us to sort of answer the question he's asking. So he writes, genuine question. Why do WNBA fans care what a former CEO who represents the rich owners in the league thinks about cultural issues? This is exactly how I would expect someone like Cathy Engelbert to respond to this question. So before we get to answering why WNBA fans care, the place he's coming from is essentially looking at the status quo of what goes on in other professional sports leagues, where there's a lot of hate online. There's even a lot of hate that comes from some of these individual players. There are some instances where athletes are not the moral figures that some players in the WNBA are looked to be.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, why do you think fans care as much as they do?
Well, I think it's really important to know about WNBA fans that they feel much more part of it than NFL fans, NBA fans, NHL fans. That it's not the same, because the league has grown so quickly. The fans who have been there, first of all, very much feel ownership. But even beyond that, like, there's a closeness. And I think part of that is thanks to players being so, they're very open with fans, and they talk to fans, and they recognize and know who their fans are. And there's relationships. A few years ago, I was at Sue Bird's last game in Seattle, and the relationship that those fans felt with Sue Bird, and it was like, I want to say 20,000 people in the place, but they all felt like Sue Bird was theirs. And that's how WNBA fans are. So when someone who is at the very top of the league completely misses the point on racism, then those fans are worried that she is going to miss the point and not see that the racism and the homophobia that their players, and there's ownership there, whether it's fair or not. And we could probably do 3 more podcasts on the relationship between fans and players, but that's another discussion. They do feel protective of them. So that's why they want to protect their players and their teams. Fair or not, maybe it's not fair, but that's why they care.
Yeah, I also think that the expectations of the WNBA as a league are different. And I think this is sort of what you're saying here. The expectations are different than the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NHL, even the NBA. Expectations for WNBA players and for the league are just so different. There is a moral high ground that exists in WNBA circles. There is this role model factor that exists much more than in other sport leagues. it's really interesting because I was in a scrum recently with Nneka Ogwumike, and the one and only one of our colleagues and one of the hosts on this show, Howard Megdal, he asked her, he said, we were all talking about how WNBA players are organizing during this election cycle. And he's like, well, you were there in 2016 when the league fined players for organizing over social injustice or in something more political. And he asked, how does it feel to sort of have the league back you? And so, I don't know, this whole moment makes me think, are we going back to 2016?
I mean, that I think is probably the bigger fear for players over the past 5-6 years in particular. I mean, even before that, because, we look at the Minnesota Lynx as really the template for how any team organized against social injustice, not just WNBA teams. That is something that there's pride in the league, and the fans have pride. Fans, it's funny. Anytime anything happens with Raphael Warnock, like when he was speaking during the DNC, you see fans tweet out like, "That's right, we brought him to you." No, it wasn't fans, but it was. And so there's always this moment of pride of how that WNBA is different, how it's not like other leagues. And so I think that's also a part of it is like, yeah, our players not only are allowed to speak out, but they're encouraged to. And so there's a very large contingent of fans that's a big deal. They want to know, especially like there's so many LGBTQ fans. They want to know that the players have their back, and they do, and so it's kind of that part of it too, is like the fans knowing that the players have their back. So they are so happy that they get to have the players back.
That's a relationship, as you said earlier, that where else is it in sports?
Yeah. I definitely, I cover a lot of Olympic sports, and really the only time I see anything like that is in smaller Olympic sports that aren't as well known. So like, it's the same thing. Fans take ownership because you have to work so much harder. And that's also a part of it, is that for many years when like you didn't have every WNBA game online and you had to watch on your computer or whatever, you had to work harder to be a fan. You couldn't just sit on your couch and watch games all day Sunday like you can now. So that also makes fans more like have more ownership.
So in segment 3, we are going to discuss the opportunity that the league has here. We're going to get solution-based, which we started a little bit in segment 2. But first, I do want to talk to you all about our friends at BetterHelp. And so this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something that you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like? Or was that lost in childhood or adolescence? So to get personal, I've been in therapy on and off for almost 10 years now. I realized that I needed some new tools on how to deal with test-taking anxiety, as it was getting in the way of my ability to pass my road test and get a driver's license. It was really hard at first. I thought that something was wrong with me, and that the fact that I needed someone's help to reach this goal, that, I wasn't good enough and that I wasn't strong enough. But that's just it, that there is nothing wrong with asking for help. If anything, it is the strongest people who do. So in addition to teaching skills that help with anxiety, it's helpful for learning positive coping skills for all different types of situations. It can help with setting boundaries in all of your most near and dear relationships, and it empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced a major trauma, but also so many people have trauma. You aren't alone in that. Just like how I wasn't alone in being really anxious to take my road test. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity and also improve. What therapy is about is it's about improving yourself and your interactions with others. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Thank you, BetterHelp. And that story is completely true. And going to therapy is one of the best decisions I've ever made. And we are back with Maggie Hendricks for our final segment here. So, okay, let's talk solutions. So you began talking about a really interesting, like, public service announcement that Cathy Engelbert could sort of do with the league social media staff. But what else do you think she could do in order to sort of repair this relationship with players?
I think what she needs to do isn't a public thing. I think she needs to go and talk to particularly the players that we know have been really, really bad victims of this cyberbullying. We know Diamond DeShields and Dijonai Carrington and Angel Reese have all, and Kennedy Carter, have all gone through so much and had so many terrible, terrible things said to them, death threats. Angel Reese talked recently about how people have made AI versions of sexual and graphic images of her and sent them to family members.
Like deep fakes.
Yeah, they've been doing deep fakes to her and sending them to her family members. And then her family members are like, Angel, we don't think this is you, but right. So I think what really needs to happen is that Cathy Engelbert needs to meet with these players and understand the impact that this has had on them and had on their lives and their ability to just live their lives as they've wanted. And in that listening, maybe she will get more ideas on how to combat this as a league and to make it so that this kind of talk and discussion is not welcome and that there are some tools for the players to deal with it.
Right. I mean, we've always sort of heard Cathy Engelbert talk about how when she first came to the league, and she continues to now, she goes on listening tours in the different markets across the country. And so she needs to go on a listening tour and listen to the players and hear what they have to say about what they've been through. And so also, I think you bring up Angel Reese. Something that I think Angel and the Chicago Sky have done very well, and I applaud them for this, is they have an interesting campaign, which it's called Block the Negative, Post Up Positivity, and there's a website. It's called takeittoThe.net, and I will attach that website link and the YouTube video that promotes the campaign in the show notes. I will do that. And so I quickly looked at this campaign, and they put up like a social media mental health toolkit where the Chicago Sky outline things that you can do when you see hate speech or any sort of harassment on the internet. And so I thought that was a fascinating approach. You have one of the faces of the league, in Angel Reese, and her team, her organization, coming up with resources, standing up against hate speech and cyberbullying. You know, I wonder, could other teams, could the Indiana Fever, who there are a lot of Caitlin Clark Indiana Fever fans that have been engaged in some of these very hateful discussions. But maybe we shouldn't just limit it to the Fever. Maybe this should be league-wide. Each team should do something like this.
And I think what could be done is the league could offer a starting point, and then each team could tailor it to what their players and what their market needs, because it's a little bit different everywhere. And I think that at the very least is a good place to start. And again, like Angel, because of this, knows that the Chicago Sky has her back. So having that kind of thing where it's not just for her, and it's not just for the Sky players. Like, they have made it for everybody, so that when other people when fans see, like, wait a second, what are they saying to Angel? What are they saying to Diamond DeShields? They know now how to take action for it.
Absolutely. Maggie, before we sign off, I think I just want the listeners to understand how vital it might be for Cathy Engelbert to, put some work in on this. And yes, listen to players and support some of these campaigns, because we know that there is something quite important coming up.
The CBA negotiations, they can opt out in 2025. So if they come to the table and have a negative view of how she has not supported their health and safety, that's going to be a much more contentious negotiation. 2020 was, I know it wasn't like easy, but 2020 was definitely two sides working together to get to a certain point. And there's been a lot of changes in the league since then. There's been a lot more money in the league since then. So if they want to have another very non-contentious negotiation, starting from a place of good faith from her side would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no off season in the NBA and in women's basketball too. Mm-hmm. And Locked On NBA provides daily pro men's basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. That's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I want to give a huge shout out to Maggie for hopping on the show today. Maggie, please tell the good folks where they can find your work.
The best bet is just to follow me at MaggieHendricks.com. Or no, I'm Maggie Hendricks on Twitter and Instagram and all of the things, because the Olympics are over. So, looking for work again. Yay.
Well, this has been Jackie Powell and
Maggie Hendricks.
And we hope you have a wonderful weekend.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.